Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Paul TX141 Walsh, also known as Britain a Spit, and welcome back to another round of the Acelith Design Endurance Championship for 2020. This being Season 6, round number 2, and we're taking a look, as always, at the guys in Tier 1, the Premier Division of the Championship. Where are we today? That is the big question. Well, we are at the Blue Moon Bay Speedway Infield B variant. Now, this is quite a rare variant to see being raced on, and the simple reason for that is that it's a very different circuit from what you typically expect, and the cars we've got running today, well, they are some of the much faster cars out of those available. We are looking at the Group 1 category cars, the fastest of those available to race in. Here today, we do have two drivers who are not taking part, one of whom is the same driver who did not take part in the previous race, and that was Bubo Lubo, unfortunately not able to take part again. And we also do have one other driver who's not been able to make today's race, and they'll be missing out on an opportunity here potentially, and that, as we just double check, does appear to be, so we're just going through our driver list right now. Awesome Alex, so our fourth place driver from last time out has not been able to make today's race, which is unfortunate. And also, we do have one other driver who's pulled out in the form of DJ Rice. So Rice has not been able to make this one. My apologies for the confusion there. So we will have just the 12 drivers out on the circuit today. But nonetheless, here we go. So I missed out. It's 3 drivers not racing today. My apologies, ladies and gentlemen. But we have 12 here, and it's all still good points available for the guys. And we can see that our first driver to essentially come around to complete a lap will be Gadget 334. Going for the approach of driving solo here, Gadget. Now, this can work to your advantage if you want to get a solid lap in whereby you're essentially not influenced by slipstream or having to get within the pack, if you will. But the flip side, of course, is that if you are in that slipstream, so Mr. Sean, for example, what you may find is that actually your qualifying lap is bolstered massively. Now, the pace setter does appear to be Plux the Dark in the Audi with the first of the 39.8 laps, so the first driver to get into the 39s. But of course, as we go deeper and deeper into this qualifying session and the drivers settle down, it can be expected, as they're all running that super soft tyre because of the optimum grip it applies, that we will see more and more drivers creeping into the 39s. And I think Plux has really set the yardstick here, and already we can see that Jagannat in the Tomahawk has made it into provisional pole with that 39.8 as well. In fact, my apologies, that was an error on our timing screens there. Plux the Dark is in the 40s, it's Jagannat with a 39.8. And we can see more laps coming through here, and Jagannat improving to a 39.8, but a slightly closer one to the 39.7s. And meanwhile, another driver is now into the 39.8s, and that is G-Rabbit, also in the Tomahawk. So remember what we said earlier about the Tomahawk being the favourite here, where it's going through to fruition, as we're seeing drivers go around this point. And C.S. Smith decided to run the soft initially, but switching over to the super soft now, perhaps deciding to run the soft in the race and moving on to the super soft as part of the next part of his qualifying stint. Because remember, all of our drivers do have a 15-minute window, so they do have that opportunity to change the tyres they want to run in the race, and then on track change to the tyres they want to run in qualifying. And one would suspect, because the tyre wear multiplier here, despite it being ×5, is one where it's not going to be felt as heavily because there's not that many braking zones or cornering zones as such. We could suppose that essentially running a heavier tyre here in terms of durability rather than grip may actually work nicely, because you don't have to worry as much about using the tyre to improve your lap time here. You've only really got one corner where you're going to, also 2 corners, but one in particular where you're going to really notice that loss in grip if you run, say, the medium tyre, and that is turn 1. Whereas with turn 4, you do have that heavy braking zone, and then you want to get on the power as soon as possible. That may cost you a tenth or two if you're running the soft, or perhaps up to 4 tenths if you're running the medium or the hard, but you're not going to feel it as much, and so you can afford to have the more durable tyre, because it will allow you to essentially run deeper and deeper into the race. Now we're seeing more lap times coming at this point, and the pole sitter is still Jagannath in the Dodge SRT Tomahawk with that 39.8, the very low one. And then we've got G-Rabbit sitting on a 39.8 with another Tomahawk, and then Flapjack in the Hyundai. So the first of our Hyundais here with provisional third with a 39.9 and close to the 39.8s. And then we've got CS Smith also running those 39.9s. And then finally we have got the first of our 40s runners, and that is Plux the Duck in the Audi, really feeling the pressure on that Audi already, and you can see that in the hybrid battery deployment. He's really having to use the most out of that in order to get the best possible qualifying time, and you can see that his times are rather awkward at the moment. He's trying to find a bit of pace, and perhaps he's just looking for that elusive slipstream to get him into the 39s and give him the opportunity to perhaps just creep ahead of the chasing pack here, because perhaps he doesn't want to be in it knowing that the Audi's going to suffer in the long term. Now we're looking a bit further down. Berkey Baby currently provisional P6. Then we've got Zephyx's Jack, or JJ Balding as is previously known, as CS Smith 93 has set the provisional pole now of a 39.7, and that is an absolutely phenomenal lap. Jagannath responding back to P2 with a 39.7 as well. Those lap times are coming down. We've now got two Dodge Tomahawks really setting the trail up ahead in terms of those qualifying times. Meanwhile, further down, we shouldn't forget about the rest of our field. We've got Jack, who is running in the Hyundai, and then we've got Mr. Sean. Drivers at the moment sitting in the 40s, but perhaps looking for an opportunity to get a bit of a fast lap as they go. Sean in particular may be feeling that he needs to get that Tomahawk a little bit higher up the grid, but then could be biding his time for the race, and it'll be strong in the race as well. Sitting on what is at the moment a 40.4. And then we have got in 9th at this point in time, we've got Gadget 334. Now, a little story about Gadget. Last time out, you'll note that Gadget did not have the best of races and really seemed to struggle at the start of the race and also in qualifying, and started picking up some pace towards the end of the race to improve on his starting position. The short story is that Gadget was having some difficulty with his equipment last time out, some technical issues, but fortunately he's been able to get that resolved. He's got his fingers crossed, and whilst he may not have the best qualifying result today, he reckons that he'll be able to put in a significant amount of performance in the race and be able to creep up the field. So good luck to Gadget. Go Gadget. But meanwhile, we've also got another story at hand here, and that is with regards to one of our drivers who's a bit further towards the front in terms of lap time, and that is Flapjack 247. Now, for those of you who are a bit astute, you may remember that in the post-race interview last time out with Flapjack, we had the conversation with regards to his equipment. And, well, with regards to his equipment, he was hoping to be able to make the transition to wheel and pedals, but unfortunately not all of his equipment has arrived as of yet, which is a downer. So he's running on the PlayStation 4 controller again for this race, and we know that Flapjack, as seen last time out, has some absolutely phenomenal pace, especially late on in the races. We was on a charge in the previous round to try and get onto the podium, but didn't quite work out. So expect Flapjack to be strong here again today, one of those who's a real pace setter in the race, and perhaps this will be his final race on the controller, moving towards the wheel and pedals next time out. But good luck to Flapjack, and good luck to all of our drivers, of course. Now, the last but not least consideration here is what about our newer drivers within? Well, we've already talked about the fact that Sir Bottlejob is the one who really suffered last time out in terms of getting to grips with Tier 1 by looks of things, having a bad start to the race, and they're really getting back into the fight and finishing the last of our runners in round 1, but currently sitting at provisional P10. Not a bad lap there from Sir Bottlejob in the Hyundai, looking at that 40.4, and you can see how close it is with only 7 tenths between Bottlejob and P1, and that's where qualifying is not going to be as big a factor here, simply because of how close the lap times are, and really it's about nailing that perfect lap to be right at the front. But do you really want to be up the front, knowing how important slipstream is going to be over the race distance? But the flip side, of course, is Bottlejob will want to perhaps improve a little bit, so he's in the mid-pack, not right at the back of the pack, because if there is a major accident, as he comes into the pits again, so we will transition away, if he has a major accident, or if there is a major accident right at the start of the race, that could scupper his chances to be able to follow the pack as they go into the first quarter, and that will mean that he'll be limited and who he's fighting against as he goes into the latter quarters of the race. Now we've got Senna here, Ayrton Senna, who we haven't really talked about as much. Didn't have the best of results last time out, and he's running in the Bugatti Vision Gran Turismo here. One of those cars, again, does not have a hybrid, so it's going to be deploying all its power all the time around the circuit, but it's one of those cars which It's definitely fast down the straights, but perhaps not as strong as some of the other cars available here, such as the Tomahawk, but it's one to watch out for. We saw in Tier 2 in Season 5 that the Bugatti sprung a few surprises at Fuji, and so it's not to say Ayrton Senna can't pull off a great result here today. And then currently provisionally P12 and the last of our runners in qualifying, that is Muller CJ in the Hyundai. Perhaps not just having the best of qualifying at the moment with that 40.7, a second off of pole, but could improve as time goes on. And speaking of improvements, we've just seen that CF Smith has now promoted his lap time to a 39.5. That's 2 tenths faster than Jagannath in second at the moment. That is a phenomenal lap. Goodness me, Smith is absolutely pushing it to the core right now. And I get the feeling, ladies and gentlemen, that we could be looking at that being our pole lap, given the fact that, simply put, that is an absolutely sensational lap to be getting around here, and well above our predictions as Smith has clipped the wall on the outside of the exit of turn 4 and now needs to repair the aerodynamics because they are quite quickly damaged by just even a simple graze. And speaking of improvements, G-Rabbit now to provisional P2 with a 39.634, splitting the Frenchman and the Brit, who were essentially bouncing back and forth between provisional pole and second. But Jagannath's now got some work to do to get back on that front row. And now we can see that a number of our drivers have managed to get into those 39s, with Jagannath sitting on that 39.7 as known before, and now Flapjack also within there, comfortably with a 39.9, the same lap as we saw earlier. So not improvement so far, but will he improve at the end of this lap? Nope, not an improvement there. And then very closely followed behind by Zephyx's Jack, who's currently sitting on a 39.9 of his own. And then finally the first of our 40s now would be Pluxter in the Audi, almost into the higher 39.9s, sitting on that 40.049 at the moment, just trying to get the most out of that Audi. You can see Plux is really throwing that car around, and so much so we're going to ride on board for a little bit here and just listen to that Audi as it's charging round. Grazing the wall a little bit there. That will cost him a tiny bit of time, probably compromise the lap, but he's going to have multiple more chances to go here, looking at least about another 8 laps, depending on whether he comes into the pits or not, or decides to give himself some space. And you can see out on the circuit map so far as Plux comes around and does not improve that time. Now our drivers now are bunching up a little bit as Muller CJ improves his lap to a 40.5, which places Muller in provisional 11th at the moment. So Muller's been able to get ahead of Senna at this point, and you can see some of our drivers now perhaps just starting to calm themselves down a little bit, such as Sean. You can see that he's sitting in the pits for that Tomahawk, perhaps thinking to himself, right, I'm not going to improve anymore, so you know what it's time to do? It's time just to sit back, cool down, put the softs on, or go to the tyre that you want to use in the race as Smith gets out of the way of everybody, getting it very wrong into turn 1 by looks of things, or just aborting the lap and getting clear. And yeah, sometimes for some of the drivers right now, they're probably going to start preparing themselves mentally for the race, thinking, right, I've done everything I can in qualifying, I've got the work to do over the race distance, it's time just to get ready, get in the zone and go. And we'll just follow Flapjack across the line, not improving that time round. You can just see how close it's been for our drivers really here in terms of the overall lap time so far. And because it's been so close, effectively, it's one of those ones whereby I'll say we could see anybody win here depending on how the race plays out, and I think that's the key factor for a lot of our drivers here. It's not how the qualifying ends, it's how the race plays out, because they're able to stay towards the front of the pack, then they'll be in the best possible shot of winning. It sounds obvious, but it's one of those races where really you just want to be with that lead pack until the final couple of laps where you all try and break away. Imagine it like a cycling marathon, if you will, like the Tour de France. You see that the leaders try to stay bunched together in a pack as we follow Jack round to complete his lap, and it's only towards the end when they all start to really sprint and try and break away from one another. And that's what we've got to look out for with only 2 minutes remaining of this qualifying session. As Jack's coming through it, and it looks as though he's aborting his lap, breaking off and spinning into the pits in style, showing off for the cameras there by looks of the thing, showing off for our American fans who have turned out today. Coming into the pits, and we're just going to jump away, and we can see that Smith has now jumped to the soft, so Smith has pulled up and parked up, so it looks as though he doesn't feel as though he's going to improve anymore. And we've now got G-Rabbit coming around to complete another lap, the Finn driving very rapidly here by looks of things, in the slipstream as well. Will he be able to improve? And no, it's not an improvement from him, but it is an improvement from Sir Bottlejob, and it looks as though that has promoted Bottlejob up to P10, or at least secured his position in P10 for the time being, worth 40.2, and you can see how close it is now on those lap times, with the margin now for getting into the 39.9s getting smaller and smaller, and the gap in all the drivers' laps being closer and closer. As Gadget is coming towards the end of a lap right now, will he improve, having got into provisional P7, as he was following the slipstream of another driver, not quite improving there? More drivers are coming across the line here, so Gadget's not improving. Plux still unable to get into the 39.9s, very close to doing so. But look at that hybrid battery now. You can see how it's been drained down over the course of the qualifying session. And it must be frustrating for Plux, but it's good to see him out on circuit. And also throwing open competition with Gadget, of course, for the annual championship for Group 1, not wanting to lose as many points perhaps as he could have if he didn't race today, so perhaps he's motivated himself into it. But of course I know Plux, once he's out on the circuit, is a driver who feels that motivation, just sometimes needs to essentially say to himself, you know what, let's do it, just get out there and do it. And as soon as he does, as he's improving this time, already improved by 2 tenths by the looks of things, so we're just going to follow Plux around to complete his lap. And he does graze the wall there on the exit of turn 4. Now, has that compromised his lap? Doesn't look as though it has, but we're going to wait and see, as we've got some yellow flags out in the straight here, so something has gone horrifically wrong and a driver has got it wrong up towards the front. But we'll just wait and see. And Plux did not improve there. Now, we didn't quite see what happened in terms of a driver getting it wrong, and I don't think we're going to get the opportunity to catch that back now. But we can see that it's settling down, and with only 10 seconds to go before our drivers must complete their laps, and that's the end of the qualifying session, we've just got all of our drivers coming around essentially in order at this point. So Gadget is going to be not the first one to be at the end of his qualifying session. I think it is going to be Jack. No, Jack got another lap out of it, so the first driver across the line to complete their qualifying session will be, if we can just try and find them on the screen for you, well, it was one of the drivers up ahead, but Muller CJ has just had another lap. Jagannat has improved, but not to the point of gaining a place, and all of our drivers are coming across, and nobody's really improving here. But we do see that some of our drivers are still just completing a lap, Jagannat being one of them on a final lap at the moment. So will he improve? We've also got Jack coming around. We've got one driver ahead of the pair of them though, and that is Gadget. So we'll start off with Gadget, bringing it home. Will he improve off his current lap? That's a no for Gadget. What about Jack? Spinning across the line, so that's a no. And it looks as though Jagannat's decided to back out of it. So that is the end of qualifying, if you will. So 2 Tomahawks on pole, and then a Tomahawk behind them, and then the first of our Hyundais, Flapjack 247, P4 on the second row. And it's lights out and away they go, and it looks as though some of our drivers got caught out by the lights there in the fact that, well, in fact, G-Rabbit having a very good start, but most importantly, Plux the Duck using that hybrid power on that Audi to get an absolutely sensational start off the front line, off of one of the mid rows and jumping up into P1 immediately. But you can see that already with that hybrid being used to an extent, that acceleration is being offset by the Tomahawks already gaining through their straight line speed as they're coming into turn 3 for the first time of asking, now charging up to turn 4. It's going to be side-by-side action going into turn 4 for the first time, and we can see a number of drivers having to go through their side-by-side and essentially grazing the wall if you're on the outside of that group. And I think everybody has made it through the first lap without picking up any damage. So after one lap, Plux the Duck already into the pits. Now what has happened here? Did Plux pick up some damage effectively? Because we did not see that. And yes, he's picked up some aerodynamic damage, and that means that Plux has had to abort, and now G-Rabbit is up to P1. That is absolutely disastrous for Plux, and I reckon he picked up that damage coming through turn 4. So that has reset Plux all the way to the back of the field, and that's how quickly the damage can essentially take you out of the racing. With G-Rabbit now clearing the field by 1.5 seconds and Flapjack 247 up into second place. Now we did have another driver come into the pits, which we'll talk about in a minute, but first, as all of our drivers are coming through turn 4, we can see a bit of side-by-side action between Jagannat and Mr. Sean there, but not too much kicking off. And Ayrton Senna is one of the biggest gainers alongside Plux on lap number 1, and now up into P7, having started all the way down the back of the field. The Bugatti driver really getting a good start after 2 laps, and now running on to lap 3. Now looking further down the field here, so also Jack had a very poor start as well, but it looks as though Plux has gained and pulled back up onto the rear of the field, so we can see how Plux's hybrids give him the ability to quickly get back into the fight. But do not count Jack out yet. We've got a lot of laps to cover. We're only 2 minutes in, and whilst we've got 2 drivers who are breaking away from the field at this point due to a number of drivers having to fall back out into fighting, as all of our drivers pile through into turn 4 for the third time asking, they've all got to watch out for that external wall, because if they hit that wall hard enough, they're going to be picking up that aerodynamic damage. And we can see some fighting a bit further down the order here as we've got Berkey Baby and Plux the Duck fighting. And it looks though Plux is going for a double move here, running on the left-hand side, going up into the start-finish straight and onto turn 1, side by side with Berkey Baby, if you will. And now coming down, yep, he's been able to get the move. He's made the move stick so far, and now he's charging after Muller CJ. And I think Plux here knows that he's got to get it all done within the opening half of the race, because the longer the race goes, the more that Audi's going to suffer. Now, as he's charging along, he's going to go for a potential move. I think into turn number 4, he might be looking to size up Muller CJ. We're riding on board right now. Will he go for it? No, not this time. Just braking early there to make sure he doesn't clap the back of CJ's car. Got to be careful again because of that damage. And he's going side by side here as they're coming onto the turn 5, the bank left-hander, and now he's chasing after Gadget 334, already back up into 8th. Goodness me, Plux is on a charge right now. But right behind him, look how Berkey Baby's trying to come back at him, and Muller CJ as well. Muller using that double toe of Plux and Gadget to get on the inside, but having to back out of it into turn 1, knowing that it's not 2 into 1 there. You have to take the race in line or back out of it on the inside, or you've got to let the driver on the outside essentially give you the space. But Plux is making a push, and we can see Berkey Baby going side by side with Muller CJ into turn 2 and able to get the move. And now they're charging along, and will Muller come back from a move? And he's going to the inside here, and I think Muller's going to have the move done, and they're going to have to be careful giving each other space as Berkey clips the wall and Muller backs out of it there sensibly, not looking to gain for essentially perhaps a gentle tap on Berkey Baby. And further down the field at this point, we can see that Jagernat has had a really unfortunate moment. I think Jagernat's had to come off the track, essentially, and do some repair work, because has he been into the pits already? Let's find out very quickly for you, ladies and gentlemen. So much happening so fast here, it's very hard to know exactly. No, he's just... well, we can't see on our telemetry screens that he's had to pit, or perhaps he has. Yep, he has had to pit, so it would have been on lap number 3 and 4, or he's just had to back out of it. But he's chasing after Sir Bottlejob. So was there some contact between the two drivers? Alternatively, just both drivers had to come into the pits, but that's unfortunate for the pair of them. And it looks as though Bottlejob at this point is simply on the recovery driver and may want to use Jagernat in order to help him get back up to the leading pack. But remember how earlier Jack was down and looked as though he was out. Well, of course, Jack now is back up into P9 with some other drivers falling a victim to damage, and that means that Jack is now charging after the pack and is only 10 seconds off of the leader at the moment and closing very rapidly. So it's going to be a crazy charge here from all of our drivers down towards the rear of the field, and we can see a massive bunching up here of the mid-pack, what is being led by Gadget at the moment. And we can see between P5 and what is about P10 at the moment, we've got 6 drivers all chasing after one another and staying within 8 tenths of one another in terms of that train, as Plux goes very sideways there through turn number 4 and almost losing it, but catching it under control. And I think Plux is now going to go for the move on Gadget at long last. He's been trying to size it up as he's now up into P6. And will he get the move done going up into turn number 1? Well, it doesn't look like it at this point. It looks like the Hyundai's just got the legs on Plux's Audi at this point, and Gadget's holding on for another lap. So these two drivers are competing for that championship win in the annual Group 1 Championship, so they're both going to want to stay out in front. As Plux is looking to the inside here, but not being able to deter Gadget from taking the racing line through turn 2, and that means that Gadget is going to hold the position for now. And I think Plux had to back out of it there into turn 2, and it's meant that Gadget's able to hold on to the place and get a good run, and that means Plux has got a lot of work to do in order to catch up. Now, looking further down the field here, we can see that Senna is now becoming a little bit of a rolling roadblock for Jack, who is charging through on the lower side of the bank turn, coming up onto the start-finish straight. And I think Jack has got the run down here into turn 1. He's going to be on that inside, and he's got his car overlapping as a minimum, as Berkey Baby's also trying to give a little bit of a nudge on the outside to Ayrton Senna there to try and get the move, or put Senna in a position where he feels compromised, as Berkey Baby goes very wide there and just about manages to keep it together. And you can see that hybrid on that on the Peugeot has already run out of charge, and that is what I was saying about earlier with regards to that hybrid. As it goes deeper into the race, it's going to lose out, and that's only 6 minutes in, and now he's essentially got all the work to do in terms of recharging it under those braking zones. And if we flick back to some of our other hybrid drivers shortly, with Jack having got the move done on Ayrton Senna at this point, we'll see that if we jump over to Plux, he's deployed all that battery at this point, but when he comes into this braking zone, it will not fully recharge anymore, and that's where he's going to start losing out. As he goes deeper and deeper, you can see it hasn't charged up anywhere near as much as perhaps he'd like it to, but he is still fighting for that P5, and I think he's going to have the inside here into turn 2, and Gadget's going to have to back out of it and start to prepare a chargeback move. But further up the field right now, as Gadget has backed out of it, we can see that Flapjack 247 is up into P2, and it looks as though CS Smith 93 has been overtaken somewhere out on track. We didn't quite catch that, unfortunately, because so much going on, but it does mean that Flapjack and Smith are fighting for P2 right now, and that's enabling G-Rabbit to essentially creep away. And this is great news for the Finn, who's going to be really on course to set himself up well going into the next quarter of this race, in the fact that he's got a 4-second gap, and with second and third still fighting side by side through turn 1, and now coming into turn 2, Flapjack backing out of it here and settling in behind, but he will be looking to make a comeback. That means that the Finn's got it all to play for in terms of just being able to creep away from the chasing pack. But as they're coming up into turn 4 on the 11th time of asking, we can see that Smith has got it horrifically wrong there and picked up damage to both the front right wheel and also the front bumper, whereas Flapjack has not, and Smith is going toe to pit, and that is going to cost Smith approximately about 8 to 10 seconds, and that is going to put him right back in the clutches of the guys who are currently battling over P6, 7 and 8. But meanwhile, up towards P3 now is Plux the Dart and Mr. Sean chasing after him. Well, they're side by side going up into turn 1, and it looks as though Sean's been able to retain the position despite Plux getting ahead on the straight initially with the Tomahawk's superior straight line speed and picking the right line to attack into turn 1. But now coming into turn 2, Plux is coming back once again. Oh, that was very tight there, Plux. You've got to be careful of that one. I think Sean just about managed to give him enough space there. That would have been quite the racing incident if the two drivers had come together. That was a very, very well played move there, right on the limits of comfortable, but he's made it stick, and now Plux has essentially got to try and get a good pull going down the start finish straight once again to turn 1 and try to now go chasing after Flapjack, who of course has been released to chase after G-Rabbit all the way up the front. Now Gadget 334 do not count him out as we see another driver coming into the pits here, and that means Berkey Baby's coming in. Now let's see what's happened to Berkey Baby. In fact, we're not going to be able to get on the board. Berkey's picked up some aerodynamic damage to the front of his car, and as a result that's reset him effectively and dropping him all the way back to 11th. Meanwhile, Bottle Job really not having the best of races right now, running last of our runners all the way down the field, 28.8 seconds behind our leader and 6 seconds behind the closest car. Berkey Baby's just come out of the pits. That's unfortunate for Bottle Job. As I said, we're only 9 minutes in, and this means that Bottle Job still has multiple opportunities. Now up front, it's G-Rabbit leading ahead of Flapjack on lap 14. Then we've got Plux the Dark in P3, followed by Mr. Sean in P4. Now side by side between Gadget 334 and Zephyx's Jack for P5 and P6. Then we've got CS' Smith 93 for P7. Then we've got Muller CJ in P8 currently. Then we've got Ayrton Senna in 9th. Then we've got Jagernat in 10th right now, chasing after the field after his pit stop for damage. And then we've got Berkey Baby in 11th. And then last but not least of our runners currently after 14 laps is Sir Bottle Job chasing after the field and gaining gradually. But we can see here how it's just spread out so much, and really we need to focus on what's happening between our drivers in the battle for P5. And what we can see is that Jack has got the move done. Now, can we catch that on the replay camera, or have we missed it effectively? It looks as though he got the move done into turn 1, and then yep, he secured it through turn 2 by simply having that inside line and the authority to essentially say to Gadget, look, you're going to have to get behind me. Unless you've got to run back at me into turn 4, it's not happening this time, pal. So that's Jack up into P5 right now, and we're potentially going to see some pit stops within the next 5 to 10 minutes with some of the drivers' tyres starting to feel the wear, particularly the super soft runners. But it's really close right now for P5, and really we've got a mini battle of 3 drivers here all fighting over P5, with the rearmost driver of this group being CS' Smith 93. Now Smith is in a nice position here because what he can think about is he's going to get a double toe launch going, oh goodness me, almost taking the wall for a ride there as he switched to the medium. Now that, well in fact he's probably started on that medium or switched to it very recently after picking up the damage, and that is an interesting investment. So remember what I said earlier, tyre wear here is not as big a factor, and that means that you're able to run those tyres which have a longer duration in terms of durability rather than in terms of the overall grip they offer per lap. You're able to essentially take those tyres and make them work, because if you run the slipstream of these guys as you're going onto those straights, you're just going to close up the gap that you essentially opened out to those drivers through the corners where they've got the grippier tyres. So this is a smart play by Smith 93 in my opinion, and it could really benefit him so long as he's able to keep within the slipstreams uncomfortably of Gadget in front and make sure not to lose it coming out of turn 4 in particular, as he almost does there. But you can see just how quickly that Tomahawk's able to get up speed, and then with the toe of Gadget, although he's going to fall out of it as he comes into the straight here, or almost fall out of it, yep, just fall out of it. It means that he's going to be able to keep chasing these guys down. If he can nail one lap, or they fight a little bit over P5, and that's probably what Gadget's thinking right now. Meanwhile, in P6, he's thinking, right, just make sure not to fight Jack too hard until we've cleared Smith entirely and put about 1.5 seconds, and then we can perhaps have 1 or 2 fights and then settle it down. But meanwhile, up front, leading now by 6.2 seconds over Flapjack, we can see it's G-Rabbit. one of our promotees from Tier 1, really running away right now, being the hair of the field, charging away and sprinting away. And then we've got Flapjack 247, who's broken away from Plux the Duck, interesting enough, and the rest are chasing back in second. So these two drivers now really do have that comfort zone, and Plux is really the first one of our drivers who's really feeling on that rear right tyre. Look how heavily worn it is, really having to make that car work in order to get the most out of it, and it's worked out for Plux, and the fact he's all out to P3, but of course he's got to keep in mind of that hybrid energy, and also the fact that tyre wear is going to make things very uncomfortable in the acceleration zone coming out of turn 4 in particular, and he'll need to steady the car, with the front right also starting to see significant wear. And it'll be the right hand side tyres that are going to take the heaviest wear here, with the track being an anti-clockwise circuit and made up of only left hand turns bar 1, and that is a very small kink in the form of turn 3. Mr. Sean, of course, chasing after after Plux the Ducks at this point, and you can see that Sean is essentially taking it smart and sensible with those soft tyres. He's starting to experience quite a bit of wear in the rear right tyre, but because he's on the soft, it's going to go longer, and you can see the lap times aren't exactly falling off too much, and it gives him the opportunity to come back at Plux. Now, Plux did take a wide entry line there into turn 1, which you can do. You can really use the outside banking in order to try and carve the car into the corner and then get to the apex as late as possible, and that gives you great acceleration. But he's having to defend here, Sean, from Jack, and it looks like Jack in the Hyundai is really trying to get the move here. Now, this is going to be very tight into turn 4, and it looks like Jack's had to back out of it this time, and I think Jack might be thinking to himself right now, don't do anything silly at this point in the race, because you do not want to get caught back up in a fight with Smith 93 in P6, because remember, if that gap comes down even a tiny bit, and what we should note, by the way, off camera, we have seen that Gadget has actually been passed by Smith, so that has happened quite recently, and that was the factor as well, as we said, that Smith could be the one who's really going to cause the surprises here, as we can see that Sean is really trying to get a move on Plux, but in return he's gone very deep on the exit of turn 1, and that's going to give Jack a real run here as they're coming down into turn 2, and he's got Sean on his left hand side. I think he's been able to clear Sean, and we're just riding on board, and he's got the clearance, and yep, that is Sean. He's fallen back into P5 for the mistake on the exit of turn 1, and that gives Jack the opportunity to charge after Plux the Duck. Now, looking further down the field, because whilst it's great to look at these guys, it's good to look elsewhere, we can see that Muller CJ is now up into P8, and we can see Jagannat has crept back up into P9 and closed on the field. Then we've got Senna, who is 7 seconds behind, running in the Bugatti, just in P10 at the moment, and gradually creeping his way towards the field, or hoping to. And then we've got Berkey Baby, who is being chased down by Sir Bottlejob at this point, and Bottlejob is really putting in the legwork here to try and catch up to P11. So we have to keep an eye on that as we go deeper and deeper into the race. Now, meanwhile, up front, we've still got G-Rabbit. The gap coming down between G-Rabbit and Flapjack, it's dropped now to just under 6 seconds. So Flapjack's perhaps getting a move on a little bit here, although the gap between Flapjack and Plux the Duck is now up to almost 6 seconds. So we can see that our leaders really are disappearing off into the distance right now. But we've seen that time and time again in races. And then, Plux the Duck, speaking of the devil, is coming into the pits now, and he definitely wants to get off that super soft. That super soft rear right tyre is absolutely shattered, and I think he's going back to he's going to a set of softs, so now he's going for the long game. Now this is going to be important. Now he's going to be brought out, and he's going to be in a side-by-side battle with Jagannat here as they come through turn 1 for the for the 22nd time of asking, and we can see that Jagannat's been able to just get ahead of Plux the Duck, and this may not be ideal for the British driver here, for the simple reason that he really does not want to be fighting Jagannat too much, because Jagannat, remember, is on tyres that are much older, and so Plux really needs to clear the Tomahawk. But of course, the Tomahawk, being as strong as it is on the straights, and the fact that Plux's hybrid now is almost exhausted, or it's really feeling the fact that it's gone deep into the race, that's going to make it quite a hard pass. But Plux is in a really good run here as on the start finish straight coming down to turn 1. Now, will he look to the inside, or is he just going to run close behind? He's just running close behind the foul. Perhaps he's going to try and get a really good launch as he's coming through turn 1. And you notice that he's just eking the brake on a little bit, going into the apex of the corner, trying to get as much hybrid energy as possible so he can deploy it in the run up to turn 4. Because this is critical. He wants to get the move done here potentially, or he wants to be so close to the back of Jagannat that he gets a huge overspeed down the start finish straight and then can clear Jagannat before they go into turn 1. Now, will he get it done this time round as they come through turn 5? And you can see he's gone to the outside, Jagannat taking the lower position on the banking there through turn 5, and he's got the move done initially, Plux, but Jagannat is now jumping back into the slipstream, and it looks as though a move could be on for the return here of Jagannat back up into P8. And Jagannat takes a little peek, but Plux is able to defend it, and Jagannat decides not to go for it here, probably thinking he's only going to lose time. And you could see how Jagannat almost clipped the wall there, just using the banking going up out of turn 1 there to keep the car off of that wall. That was very close to the wall, within a hair's whip, and it means that Jagannat is now P9 and Plux the Duck up into P8 and charging after the field of those fresh soft tyres. Now we're looking further up our field at this point, and really the story now with Jack being released up into P3 with Plux pitting, what can Jack do on those super soft tyres which are nowhere near as heavily worn as Plux's? And we can see that Mr. Sean is now into the pits from what was P5 at the time, and that's going to put him quite a bit down the order here as he's about to come out from the pits. Now where is he going to come out? In fact, I think Mr. Sean is taking on fuel here as well, because that is quite a long pit stop. Maybe taking on a little bit of fuel, but that was quite a long pit stop there. And it's brought him out in some clear space. I think Sean's perhaps just taken on a small bit of fuel here to essentially, because he knew he was going to drop behind the field, but he's given himself some clear air. He's got those racing softs on, and it means now he can just charge after the field and worry a little bit less about the fuel later on. And he's cleared Senna as well, with Senna running in a bit of a different race to Sean. So that means that Sean has got the opportunity now really just to put in some good laps, avoid making any mistakes, and see where he can come out after the first round of pit stops has concluded. With a lot of our drivers, I reckon, making this race a 2 or a 3 stop if they don't pick up any damage. And speaking of another driver coming to the pit, so Jaggernaut is now coming in for his first tyre stop, if you will, i.e. the typical tyre stop we'd expect to see. And he's also got damage to the front of the car, which he's had to repair. And it may be the case that Sean had some damage as well, hence why a long pit stop. But it looks like I think it was fuel, given Jaggernaut's got very little fuel in the car by comparison with Sean at this point. But Sean's already now up into P7, and we can see that we've got Muller CJ in the pits and coming out now at the rear, also not at the rear of the field, yeah, at the rear of the field, and he's about to be lapped by P1, which is G-Rabbit, albeit G-Rabbit is a couple of seconds away at this point. But Sir Bottlejob, meanwhile, don't count him out, as I said earlier, currently running in P10 and being chased 7.6 seconds down the road by Berkey Baby in the Peugeot, running in that P11 and not having the best of races so far, but looking to close up as we go closer and closer in towards the end of the race. Now G-Rabbit, of course, is charging after, and this is where things get difficult as well, when you're starting to bunch up behind cars, the back markers, because whilst they do have a mandate to get out of the way because of blue flags, of course, when you're behind those back markers, you might want to try and use them for a little bit of a slipstream advantage and hope they get out of your way going through, say, turns 2, 3 and up into 4, because that's the ideal place where they need to get out of the way, but not really when they're coming down the straights here, where you can use them to pick up a little bit of extra time. And G-Rabbit and Flapjack here will both really want that, so that way they can pull an even greater gap, as we can see that Smith is making a comeback here on those medium tyres against Zephyx's Jack, who's running on those super soft tyres. And I get the feeling Jack's going to be starting to feel a little bit of a strain here, albeit Smith's mediums are a bit worn, but by comparison with his brake bias being clearly shifted towards the front, and that's why he's got so much tyre wear on that front left tyre in particular. We can see Smith is going for the move. They're going side by side up into turn 3, but Jack is going to have the inside line to be on the outside for turn 4, and Smith has got it done. It looks like Jack's lifted out of it a little bit and given Smith the place, thinking, okay, you know what, well done to you, Smith, but in return I'm going to get your slipstream now on the corner in of turn 5, coming into the start finish straight. Now I'll be able to come back at you or just use this to keep us away from Plux the Duck. The Duck being very fast around here in that Audi, despite the hybrid suffering and charging after both of these guys, only being currently 3 seconds down the road. As we can see that Gadget 334 has pitted to carve his super softs, very heavily worn that front right in particular. We're using that brake bias towards the front, and he's putting in a little bit of fuel by looks of things here. This is going to be key coming out of the pits, and you can see that he's putting a bit of fuel, and that's going to drop him down to what is P9. So he's going to be behind Ayrton Senna and Jaggernaut, and perhaps this is not ideal for Gadget, because now he's got these two drivers to clear. And keeping in mind, well, to be fair, Senna's got some legs to go yet on his soft tyres and the fuel situation, and Jaggernaut only recently pitted, so I get the feeling, as we can see our leaders are pitting now, that this is going to be important. Now, will we see fuel going in for either of our drivers? Well, there's some repair work there on G-Rabbit's car, and also fuel going in, and also a fresh set of tyres, so a good change there. And Smith, meanwhile, is into P2, and we can see that this is not ideal for Flapjack, with him coming out in P4 and being immediately in a battle with Plux the Duck. And if Plux gets past him at this point, this is going to be a bit of a disaster for Flapjack, because now he's got to get past the driver who was on a huge charge earlier on, and that is Plux. And that Audi, remember, it's not going to have the legs down the straights as much anymore as the Hyundai, but Plux is a very, very innovative driver, and if anyone's going to defend the place despite having a straight line speed disadvantage, it's going to be Plux. Meanwhile, the Finn out in front, whilst he is being hounded right now by Smith and Jack, who are both within his slipstream range, this is ideal because he's simply got himself a clear load of space on track, and we can expect that both Jack and Smith are going to have to hit sometime in the near future, and that will enable G-Rabbit just to run away. Now, if you're G-Rabbit at this point, what you want to do is essentially not fight these two guys behind you. If they're faster, come up into turn 4, let them through, then get back past them on that start finish straight and trade the places back and forth. You do not want to fight at this point, whereas Flapjack has to fight because he knows that Plux the Duck is essentially on a slightly offset strategy, but Plux is the charger here and the one to watch out for, and he is charging towards that podium at a rapid rate. Now, further down the field, we've got a fight going on between Jaggernaut and Mr. Sean, and remember, again, this is a situation where Jaggernaut has not worked out well in terms of his pit stops, and he's got to get past Sean as soon as possible, because the longer he's behind the British driver here, both of them running that Tomahawk, he's going to be losing time in the fight for the podium. And this is so unfortunate for Jagannat here. As you can see, he's really trying to size up that move, and they're coming down the start-finish straight to commence lap 32, and he's going to be on the inside. I think Jagannat's got it done here, so long as he keeps the brakes well managed here going into the corner, and yet he placed the car well, and that's Jagannat up into P6. But you can see the gap now to Flapjack is 9 seconds. That is a huge gap for the Frenchman to overcome on this stint, and that is so he's going to work hard on and hope that Sean doesn't come back. Now, will there be a move coming up into the start-finish straight for the lap 33? And I get the feeling there could be. What, Jagannat grazing the wall there, but Sean going very deep under braking and not picking up any damage, but that's lost him a huge amount of time and taken the pressure off of Jagannat. So well done to Jagannat for defending there. And we can see further down the field, Senna and Gadget now in a bit of a battle here, and Gadget really being the one who needs to get past the Bugatti driver at this point. Both of the Brits wanting to obviously move up the field, but Gadget is in a very different race from Senna. He's probably hoping that Senna realises this, and yet Senna's not even defending the position, knowing that he's perhaps in a bit of a different race. He's gone to the outside and probably going to... Oh no, speaking of my devil, he's coming back for the undercut on the corner, and it looks as though both drivers coming into turn 2 here, they're both going to the outside, and Senna's had to give up the positional attack on the inside, knowing it would be very tight, and Gadget was trying to squeeze him as tight as possible to the apex of the corner to essentially make it impossible for Senna to take that corner. And Gadget has clipped the wall there, but fortunately it was just a graze on the front the front left bumper, as seen from Gadget's perspective, and that is going to cost Gadget some speed on the start finish straight here, and he's got to be careful of this because Senna will be coming back as they're coming down into turn 1 once again. Now, will Senna be able to hold on to the back of Gadget effectively on his worn softs and perhaps go for the move? And it looks as though he's going for the launch, but Gadget's taken that much wider line, and whilst initially it means that it exposes him to an attack on the inside, he does get a good launch coming out of turn 1, and I think Gadget's got the place held now coming down to turn 4, and if he can nail it coming into turn 4 and hold on to it coming out of turn 5, then I think he's got the run down the start finish straight and cleared Senna completely. With that Hyundai doing its utmost with its hydrogen engine to keep the monstrous Bugatti at bay. And we can see that while Senna is still in the slipstream zone, he is gradually falling back. Now, further up the field, we can see, hold on a second, has there been a bit of an incident here? Because we can see Plux is up into P3, and Roy's on a charge indeed. But on top of that as well, it looks as though there's been some sort of heavy fighting because the gap has really opened up to Smith here. But before we switch to that, let's just ride with our guys here and see what's going to happen with Flapjack being the main beneficiary here. You can see how much Flapjack has gained, and we can see that Jagannat has gained by over 2 seconds on these guys. So something major has recently happened. We're going to try and get that back for you very shortly, folks, because that was an absolute nightmare for the runners here. Now let's just take a look as they're coming down into turn 1 for the 36th time of asking. Jack going to the inside here, Plux just about holding on there, and you can see how Plux is positioning his car to essentially say, guys, you're going to have to give me the space because I'm still on that outside and you're not completely past me, taking that very wide line, working for Plux and essentially making it difficult for Jack to get the move done. I feel confident that he's got the move done, and it means now that Jack is in the fight with Flapjack. And what Plux is hoping here is the longer these guys keep fighting behind, he may not completely clear them, but he'll essentially be giving them the slipstream to fight one another, and in return he can have a peaceful race. As his hybrid, you can see how much that battery has been drained now, and he's really feeling the negativity of that battery as won the straight here, and that means these Hyundai drivers are gaining. But you can see how they're fighting with each other, and they're over half a second down as Flapjack moves up into P4 here, but in return it means now Plux has got himself a nice bit of security, and he can keep running away on the charge for the podium here. Now, we are going to take a look back to see if there was an incident or anything. Well, there was already fighting coming into turn 1, so if there was anything, and Jack had got up into P3 going up into this corner, but coming through here now, did somebody make an error here? No, Plux got back past by taking the cutback on the inside. So it was just simply through a lot of fighting. So there's been a lot of fighting going on whilst we've been looking further down the field, and that would justify exactly why the gap has opened up, and Smith has been able to essentially just saunter off into the distance, and he's chasing down G-Rabbit now. But remember, Smith is on a very different strategy from G-Rabbit, and we did talk about that in the fact that G-Rabbit just has to feel comfortable that within effect, so long as he doesn't fight Smith too hard, Smith is naturally going to fall off on his current stint, and that will give G-Rabbit a nice amount of breathing room, which at the moment would be approximately 4 seconds to the charging Audi in third place. So this is working out for G-Rabbit, but he's got to be conscious of those times right now and probably just thinking to himself, just stay focused, keep putting in the laps. We're 26 minutes in, we've got 34 minutes to go. It's not over yet. This isn't a race 1, but it's definitely looking like a podium at a minimum. But you never know, the Finn could be on for the win here. Now looking further down the field, it looks like things have spread out between Flapjack and Jack at this point, so perhaps they've just settled down now and resumed an order. Jaggernaut in 6th at this point, and we can see that Mr. Sean right now running in 7th, clear of Jaggernaut, as we spoke about earlier, in terms of the gap between the two. Jaggernaut having got past Mr. Sean, and that means they're not fighting, and Gadget is on a bit of a charge right now, in the fact he's in P8, just set his best lap of the race so far, a 40.6, and he's got 5.5 seconds over Sir Bottlejob in 9th, who we shouldn't forget about. Remember, this was the driver who fell 28 seconds behind our race leaders in the opening couple of laps, but he's up into P9 and in a bit of a competitive fight here with Berkey Baby, albeit they're on slightly offset strategies, as we see Berkey Baby clip the wall there on the exit of turn 1, picking up damage to the front bumper and also the front right tyre. So Berkey Baby is going to have to pit at the end of this lap. That is serious damage to the car, and that's going to make it a very difficult car to control through turn 4 in particular. He's going to be careful not to exacerbate that damage, and you can see how he's having to take a much safer line into turn 4 and into turn 5, and it means that he's dropping time now. Whereas Muller, meanwhile, in P11, don't count him out, and the same with Senna, who did come into the pits quite recently, and it looks like Senna's going to take on some fuel in the near future, and perhaps there's some damage on the car as well, but Senna's really fallen back at this point, and we're going to have to wait and see what happens with regards to Senna. But meanwhile, looking back towards the front once again, we can see at this point that it is Plux Duck who's really on that charge for P2. Now the gap between him and CS Smith 93 coming down to 1.3 seconds as we take a quick sip of water almost at the halfway point. And we can see how hard Plux is really working those tyres, particularly that rear right. It's absolutely shredded. And remember how much damage he did to the rear right on the super soft tyre. Well, now look at it on the soft tyre. It's almost looking in the same condition already. But Plux is really trying to go for it. He's gone hell for leather and decided, you know, I don't really care about my tyres. I just want to get onto the podium and then charge after the race win. And good luck to Plux for that. But of course, this could all come back to haunt him should he make one mistake upon acceleration with the Audi, as it's coming towards the end of its fuel now. Flapjack, meanwhile, of course, chasing after and keeping within arm's reach here. And we can see that Jack, at some point, well, his tyres are very heavily worn. The super softs in particular, those front ones, going very long on those super softs. Now, it's worth noting that Jack, as a result of this, could be looking to essentially take on the fuel here and then put on a slightly more durable set of tyres and see if he can go to the end after this stop. And that's not impossible here. It could work out in Jack's favour, but he's got to play it smart. So we'll see where he comes out very shortly, as we can see a lot of drivers coming through onto the start-finish straight. And I think if he's taking on all the fuel here and he switched to another pair of superstars, so Jack may be doing one more stop, but he's going to try and make those superstars go along, and he comes out side by side with Berkey Baby here. Now, will Berkey Baby get past? It doesn't look like it. And remember, Berkey Baby was the driver who really suffered some damage. In fact, he's going to get the initial launch, but he's got that damage on the car, and he's still running without repairs to that car, so he feels comfortable with the car and feels as though he can keep it under control. But that is a wounded Peugeot there, and that's something Berkey's going to have to keep an eye on, because that is really going to be very difficult driving. You can see him clip the wall there out of turn 4 once again, and that's already taken him out of the fight for P9 at the moment, trying to essentially get in the way of Jack, and it means now he's got Muller CJ breathing down his neck in the battle for P10. Muller, of course, being one of those drivers who really suffered in the opening stage of the race, but he's now on the charge, and I think he's going to try and get down the side going into turn 1. He's not quite there yet, so he may be trying to come back at him later on in the lap. But this is the closest battle that we've got out on field so far by looks of things, looking at our race data. And we can see that CJ's just not able to get close enough at this point. But perhaps he'll get the run next time round. But we'll just take a look further down the field as well. We've got Senna closing in on these guys, 2.4 seconds down at this point, but coming up for a fuel stop in the near future. I think it hasn't quite worked out for Senna in the fact that really he's picked up some damage and perhaps also had to get new sets of tyres on, and really it's been out of sequence in terms of being able to get the fuel in the car and new tyres on the car, and it means that it's really compromised the strategy here. So Senna's not having the best of days out of our drivers so far. But the one to talk about here, what with Jack having pitted and come down to P9, is Sir Bottlejob right now, who's up into P8. Now, of course, Bottlejob will have to pit in the near future with that front right soft tyre being absolutely shredded and fuel being on a very low status right now. But this means that Bottlejob effectively has gone very deep into the race, one of the deepest right now, having picked up damage earlier on or fallen off earlier on, and it means that he could spring a surprise and get a top 10 by the end of this one. Never say never. We're looking further down once again. We're just going to see here, Muller is closer than ever to the back of Berkey Baby, but is he close enough to potentially go for the move here? We're really on that charge, charging after the Peugeot in the Hyundai, and you can see that Berkey is coming into the pits to take a pit stop and repair that damage, being critical on fuel. So this is going to release Muller, and it's probably going to give him a nice bit of clearance to Berkey Baby for the rest of the race until finally Muller comes in for a pit stop, and he will be coming in for a pit stop based on the fuel remaining. That's key to remember, as now we're starting to see cars being lapped out on circuit with with the first side drivers to be lapped as Plux the Duck is into the pits. Now this is going to be important for shaping up the field, because this may be Plux's last stop, depending on how he wants to play it on the tyres, because he was on bingo fuel. But now, could he go to the end of the race on this set of tyres, because this will be his second stop? And we'll wait and find out. It could be the case. Well, given that he's put half a tank of fuel in, so maybe going to the end of that tank of fuel, going on to a set of softs, so this could be a long stint from Ducks to get to the end. But we'll have to wait and see. But he's come out in P5 and he's got space to Gadget in P6, and he's not far from Mr. Sean in P4, so this has worked out. And speaking of feeling a bit of pressure right now, we can see that Smith, having gone to a set of mediums with his pit stop, releasing Flapjack, he's chasing after Gadget right now. He's got all the fuel in the car. The Tomahawk driver clearly a lot stronger than Gadget right now, because they're on the offset strategies and in different races. And Jaggernaut is into the pits as well from P3, being close to empty on the fuel tank and probably going for one of his final stops of this race. And by looks of things, Jaggernaut is going to be coming out in amongst these guys, and we can see drivers coming out of the pits right now. So one of our back markers coming out of the pits first and foremost, so that's Berkey Baby. Very unfortunate he's coming out in such a position, essentially getting in the way of Gadget here. Now this is going to be awful for Gadget, because that's meant Gadget's had to lift out in order to get past the back marker, and Berkey's trying to stay out of it. But look how Smith has closed up as a result of that. Now they're going to be on the charge down to turn 4. Now will Smith go for the move here, or will he bide his time? And you can see he lifted out of it a little bit there, because he wants to go for that charge onto turn 5 and then finally the start finish straight. Now he's going to be going up to about 9,500 RPM here, revving that car out, 9,600 RPM, hitting the rev limiter almost, and you can just see how unstable that car is coming through turn 5, because there's so much speed building up as they're building up towards 200 miles an hour. Now will he go for it on the brakes this time around? He's eyeing it up, he's looking for it, and he's gone for it, and he's gone very deep on the brakes there, but he's been able to get it done, and he's essentially positioned the car to prevent Gadget from getting the cutback, and that is an absolutely sensational move by Smith. So late on the brakes, but so well placed, and that means he's up to P5. But hold up folks, Gadget's coming back. Don't count Gadget out yet with the Hyundai's power here down into turn 4, but Gadget's not got the overlay here, and I think he's just going to have to try and follow the Tomahawk down the straight and see if he's able to get him moving to turn 1, perhaps do what Smith did to him on the previous lap. But that was one heck of a move by Smith there, and that took a lot of bravery, because at any point Gadget could have potentially turned him, but Gadget left the door open, and Smith, I think he'd been eyeing up for a couple of laps and thought, you know what, Gadget doesn't defend this that hard, and as a result he was able to get it done. But of course that fighting and the fact that Berkey Baby was a little bit of an unintentional obstruction, we're not essentially pointing the finger at Berkey Baby, it's just unfortunate. That means Jaggernaut is not that far behind these guys. As we can see, Jaggernaut is trying to use the slipstream of Berkey Baby in order to give it as much speed as possible, as Bottle Job is coming to the pits on 0% fuel and will be coming out after a refuel towards the back. We can see Jaggernaut is able to get past Berkey Baby here, who isn't exactly being the most compliant by looks of things. That's very unfortunate, and actually that looks as though that has completely crippled Berkey Baby's car. I think there might be a little bit of a query with the stewards after that one, because I'm not sure there whether there was compliance or whether it was sort of a misunderstanding. But Berkey Baby has had to pit, and that is essentially put him right to the back of the race, with Bottle Job now coming out the pits in P11, being the last of our runners. But coming back to Jaggernaut effectively, now that he's got past Berkey Baby under those circumstances, he's only 1.6 seconds behind Gadget and can make the charge. And really we've got a lot of drivers here in that charge for what is the podium at this point, because the leader of that podium at the moment, that podium battle, is Plux the Dark, who is back in front of Mr. Sean. And he's sitting in P3, but Mr. Sean is chasing after him, only 6 tenths behind right now. And remember that Sean does have the more heavily worn tyres here, so it's whether Plux the Duck can make this stint last to the end, because the drivers behind are likely to pit, whereas Plux might be able to overextend the stint and essentially go all the way home. But of course towards the end, when he's got a car that's very heavily worn on its tyres and low on fuel, he's going to be thinking to himself, the guys behind are a lot fresher. But this is how it is right now, and it looks as though we have got a 5-way battle for the podium right now in terms of P3. It's all the way from Plux the Duck in P3 all the way down to Jaggernaut in P7, and then we've got Zefix's Jack in P8 at the moment, 4.4 seconds down the road. Now Jack could get involved in this if there's quite a bit of fighting and some pit stops which essentially see the repair of damage, as we see Flapjack has actually come into the pits to take on a new set of tyres and fuel. And that means Plux the Duck has now been promoted to P2. And this is where it's all getting crisscrossed. And Flapjack's actually going to come out right in the middle of this pack. Now that is going to be very difficult for Flapjack, because now he's got to make sure he gets ahead of the dangerous drivers. And that's Smith in particular. Because remember, Smith's going to go for it, because Smith knows he could be on for a cracker here if he can get up into P4 and scupper Flapjack's opening run on his tyres. Because those tyres are going to be very fresh and not up to temperature yet. And it looks as though Smith has got it done. And if he can manage to get it right out of turn 4 into turn 5 here with the Tomahawk's overall speed down the straight, that is going to be a nightmare for Flapjacks. It means now he's got to work so hard to get past the Dodge, which is the favourite on these straights. And you can see that Flapjack has had to come into the pits, and he's picked up the front left wheel damage. That's so unfortunate for Flapjack, and that's scuppered his ability to stay in this fight. He doesn't chase the tyres or anything along those lines, but that means he's put to the back of this chasing pack now with a little bit of repair work, and now he's got to try and do it all again. He's got to try and get back into that podium fight once again, being 2.5 seconds down on the runners here. And meanwhile, ahead of him, it might be fortunate for him, in fact, we've got Gadget and Jag in that fight, and they've got Muller CJ ahead of them, who's essentially going to be lapped, and now Gadget will be hoping that Muller stays in the way as they go onto the start-finish straight here, so that way Gadget can use the slipstream, but Muller's hit the wall and backed out of it, which means that they're going to have to go around, and that's going to give Jaggernaut a good run down onto the start-finish straight here for the 53rd time of asking to start lap 54, and will Jaggernaut go for it on the brakes here into turn 1? Looks like he's side-by-side already, albeit he's got a bit of an overlay, and on the brakes, will he make it stick? Gadget taking that very deep line as always, and it looks as though he's not going to get the cut back, trying to build the power instead on the exit, and Jaggernaut is up into P5. And of course these drivers on very different strategies right now. Gadget feeling the wear of his tyres, Jaggernaut less so, and up ahead of them we can see that Sean and Smith are fighting, and Plux is able to run away at this point. And Smith, oh goodness me, he's going to be feeling the pressure from Sean, but of course Smith is on much fresher tyres. He's probably just trying to manage these mediums and say to himself, you know what, keep your cool, you've got 22 minutes to go. If you make these tyres last to the end of the race, and all that fuel lasts to the end of the race, it's going to scupper the guys who still need to pit. But this is so awkward because we've got the overlay strategies where some drivers are trying to do the minimal number of stops and essentially make the car last to the end of the race, such as Smith. Meanwhile, we've got drivers such as Mr. Sean who are trying to go all in, hammer and tongs, essentially to get the podium through simply driving the car off its wheels. And Sean here is just as much in the favour of trying to get onto that podium as we all the way wind back to Jack now in P8, who is only 2 seconds off of Flapjack in P7. So we have got what is effectively 8 drivers who could all finish on the podium at this point. It's so close right now. And then meanwhile in P9 then there's a sizable gap of over a minute to Ayrton Senna, who is being chased right now by Sir Bottlejob, who is only 12 seconds down the road, and these guys are on offset strategies. Bottlejob in P10 ahead of Muller CJ, and then last but not least of our runners right now, and really the one who's been the most unfortunate has been Berkey Baby, with even more damage to the car at this point. Berkey Baby not having the greatest of races right now, but we know he can spring back. He had a great time last time out at Autodrome Lago Maggiore, and I believe what was the Peugeot RCZ, so don't count Berkey out. He's just trying his hardest, and today's not his day. But meanwhile, if we look back, so in terms of the story right now, remember we've got G-Rabbit out in front, 17 seconds up the road from Plux the Duck, who is essentially only 3.5 seconds up the road from CS Smith at 93, who in turn is only 1.5 seconds ahead of Sean in P4, who is now coming into the pits because he needs to change those tyres and take on the fuel to get to the end. But of course, this is going to release Jaggernaut in the hunt for P3 currently. And then we've got Gadget so far sitting in P5, and then we've got Flapjack now up to P6, Jack up to P7, and then Sean's going to be coming out in what is clearly P8, but of course he's going to have a driver perhaps in his way in terms of and needing to lap somebody here. And let's just see who it was who's come out in front of him. So I think it was Muller CJ. It was Muller CJ, but of course he will have to get out of the way. But in return, that means now we do notice that Sean is going all the way to the end on a set of softs and this fuel tank, but he can push that Tomahawk hard now because he's only got 20 minutes to go, and that soft tyre is going to last those 20 minutes comfortably. But all the way up front, it's really all to play for. And whilst there's no real battling at the moment, as G-Rabbit is coming to the end of his current stint, he will be pitting in the next couple of laps, one would reckon, while those softs feeling the pressure. But of course, he's going to have to take on some fuel. Now, it's about 7 seconds just for the tyres, but then putting the fuel in, as long as he doesn't pick up any damage, he's going to come out in front of Plux the Duck. But how far in front of the Audi driver will he come? That is the critical question here. But meanwhile, Smith, having a clear Senna very shortly, he's going to be using that toe off of Senna in order to do so as quickly as possible in the hunt for P2. And it really does come down to whether Plux is going to be making that set of softs go to the end, or whether he's going to have to pit one more time. If he can make them go to the end, it's going to be a tough call here, but it may be a strategy that works out well. But so far, I reckon Plux is due for one more pit stop, because if they're that heavily worn with 20 minutes to go, with 10 minutes to go, they're going to be an absolute nightmare to drive on those softs, particularly that rear right, as we said before. Now, looking further down at this point, we can see it's all spaced out. Hold on a second. It hasn't quite all spaced out, I should say. As we can see, there's a battle between Jack and Flapjack here for P6 at this time. Flapjack holding on at the moment, while Jack attacking from P7. But I think Jack is going to be going for the move here, coming up into turn number 4. No, not quite. He's going to go for the launch as they come down onto the start-finish straight. And we're just jumping to Flapjack at this point, looking back from his perspective, and you can see that Jack is trying to stay in that slipstream as much as possible. And as they're coming down to the straight here, Jack is going to get the overspeed very gradually, but is it going to be enough in terms of the length of the straight in order to get it done? And I don't think so. I think Jack has not had the best run, but he's going to go to the inside here. Now, is he going to try and go for a sneaky lunge? With Jack getting it all sorts of wrong in the corner, they're grazing the outer wall, which seemed to pull him off his racing line, or at least disturb his braking point. And they're coming down into turn 2, and a bit side by side here into turn 3. Now, who's going to back out and who's going to give way? And I think Jack is not going to be able to get it done so far, but then they're side by side into turn 4, but Jack's just had to back out of it a bit because Flapjack had the positional advantage. Meanwhile, coming across the line right now is Plux the Duck. Now, where is that going to place G-Rabbit versus Plux the Duck? And you can see that the Audi driver is only 2 seconds and decreasing after G-Rabbit's taking his pit stop. Now, G-Rabbit will need to get those tyres switched on and just run away from the Audi driver, as Gadget and Jaggernaut have pulled into the pits as well to take what one would expect will be their final stops. This is critical mass now for the Finnish driver. If he can stay away from Plux the Duck, keep it all under his cool, then he has got a great chance of winning this one, because Plux is the only driver right now who can put the pressure on him to essentially scupper his race. Meanwhile, you can see that Smith is currently working his hardest to chase after P2 and P1, and we can still see the fights going on between Jack and Flapjack. Now, we're just going to wind back and see earlier on whether there was a potential overtaking to turn 1 much earlier on as they were coming on to lap 59. And as we're coming on to the lap then, so there was an initial attempt at overtake by Jack, but Flapjack got the cutback coming into turn 2 effectively. You can see there how he got that cutback. Smart movement. We've seen that from a number of drivers today, and that's how he was able to stay in front and trigger that series of fights. But we can see now that Flapjack again has fallen behind, but we're just going to follow them and then we'll get back what initially happened into turn 1 as they're going side by side again. Careful, boys. Coming into turn 3, straight over the space. Oh my goodness, no! Oh no! And they didn't show each other the space that time, and both drivers have picked up a disastrous amount of damage, both of them getting critical damage to the front bumper and also the wheels. Oh, goodness me. And both of them hitting at the same time. They're going to be coming out fighting once again here. And it might be the time for essentially Jack to make a switch off of those. Yep, he's going for the switch off those super softs. So it sort of triggered an earlier pit stop from him. That is a disaster. Goodness me. And that means that effectively now these guys are coming out into a freeway fight. Well, Mr. Shaw's cleared them. But look who's coming up behind them right now. It is Gadget who's coming up behind them, and they've also got right ahead of them Sean, so that means now it's a 4-way fight for P5 right now, and up front it looks as though G-Rabbit's been able to pull away from Plux the Duck, now 3.6 seconds up as Plux the Duck is coming through, really suffering it would seem as Smith is closing in on him. So Plux on that charge there, I think he's going to have to potentially settle for a battle for P3, with Jaggernaut now having really finished his pit stops now and being the driver who's on the charge for P3. And remember, there's a 13-second gap between Jaggernaut and Smith at the moment, and for Plux, who's only a couple of seconds up the road from Smith, it could all play out in an interesting manner, because Jaggernaut is going to have to work hard to close that gap down to around 7 seconds in order to make sure that within effect that he's in that fight, because otherwise we can see how Plux is able to make that car work extremely well for the opening part of a stint before that hybrid really suffers and starts to be felt. And that's what Plux is going to be counting on as Muller gets out of the way but clatters the wall as a result. And we can see that the fight is still going, so the two Jags are still going at it. This is absolutely incredible. You think they calm it down, but they both want that position so badly. One of them's going to get it and one of them's going to end up in tatters. And Sean, meanwhile, is probably thinking to himself, right lads, you keep on fighting, I'll just disappear off the road, and yeah, P5's mine, I'll leave you both to it. Oh, goodness me. This is absolutely crazy stuff, as Flapjack's not able to get down his side this time around, but it could happen at any point. And meanwhile, Gadget's probably salivating and thinking, right, I've got a nice set of super softs on me now, I'm just going to manage these a little bit. And speaking of tyres, coming into the pits is both Plux the Duck and CS Smith, so this is a surprise. Now, does this mean that both drivers are going to be making a tyre change? I would expect that Smith is. He's going to the super softs, so Smith is going to try and essentially use a fresh set of super softs, as long as he doesn't come out behind Berkey Baby. And in fact, he's cleared Berkey Baby, so he's doing this, I reckon, to essentially put G-Rabbit under pressure, because he can abuse those super softs in the final stint now. And what it will mean is if G-Rabbit makes a single mistake, he will have to be in the pits, say if he picks up damage or he wears the tyres too heavily. He will be in the pits and he will feel that pressure. Jaggernaut, meanwhile, is closing up to Plux. And remember what I said about that gap having to close up? And here it is, ladies and gentlemen. This is the fight for P3 right now. And of course, Plux is on a set of softs that he's going to make last to the end. We know that they can last the 15-minute duration. And Jaggernaut right now, who's able to make the softs last a similar period, if not a bit longer in that dodge, is going to want to get past Plux at this point. This must be frustrating for the Frenchman because he knows that he's had to work so hard to get in within arm's reach of the podium. And Plux just seems to be the Audi that is always there, even though it's not the car that was going to do well today. All the punters reckon that the Audi would really struggle here. That Audi is fighting for the podium right now, and he's working it to death in order to get it up there. The hybrid's absolutely gone, and Jaggernaut's going for the move. He's gone to the outside, into turn 3, up into 4. He's got it on the brakes. Now will Plux get the cutback here? Both drivers stay clear of the wall, but it looks as though Plux is going for the cutback as they come onto the start-finish straight out of turn 5, and Plux has got the initial run around the outside, but Jaggernaut's going to tuck back into the slipstream here, and that means that Plux is going to have to go ultra defensive or just simply play back and forth with Jaggernaut until the final couple of laps, because remember, not far behind them, and Jaggernaut's gone for the move into turn 1, and I think they are doing exactly that. They're playing with one another, because we can see meanwhile, looking further back, Jack is up into P5. He's gained and cleared Flapjack and got past Sean. Now, did Sean have a bit of an incident at some point or just get it wrong? Let's take a look back in a second. Let's wait until we've seen the fighting play out, of course. As we can see, Flapjack here is going for the move, coming down into turn 4, and he's not able to get it done this time, but he's going to follow him around, riding on board. He's going to get the double toe, and watch how he's going to kick above 180 miles an hour coming down into turn 1 here, as the cars are getting unstable through turn 5 in the aerodynamic slipstream of the guys in front. And coming charging up, we can see that he's going for the move onto the inside, going down to turn 1. Now, will he have got it done on Mr. Sean this time? Or is Sean, as he claps the side of Sean there, I think there's going to be a little bit of an argument. And again, another tap on the side. Sean is not going to be happy with that one. And I think Flapjack there is really stretching his arms to say, yep, this is my P6, thank you. I don't want you in there. I'll take this one off of you, please. But meanwhile, this is a disaster because now Jack has got to try and clear traffic. That's fighting as well, because Bottle Job, currently in P9, is fighting with Senna over P9, Senna being in P10, and Jack's got to get past Senna. But remember, if Senna comes back onto the racing line, then that means that Flapjack is going to get a double toe, and meanwhile that means Sean's going to get a triple toe. As you can see, Flapjack's flashing Senna like mad, trying to say, get out the way, man, I've got a race on here. But of course that means that as Ayrton gets out the way, that means Senna's chances of getting that fight for P9 are going to be scuppered for the time being. And looking further back now, Sean's the one who's going to have to clear Senna out of the way, and I think he's going to do so due time. Although Senna pulled back onto the line there initially, perhaps a little bit blindsided by the fact that he had another driver coming through and thinking the blue flags were over. But Senna's got to get out of the way soon, because otherwise there's going to be a huge stewards inquiry, and Senna does so immediately under braking into turn 4. But that's a disaster for Sean as he's hit the outer wall, and that's scuppered his right front wheel, and that means he's going to have to pit or try and run it with the damage. But look at the gap that's opened up, and now he's breathing the pressure from Gadget as they're coming down to the start finish straight to complete lap 70. This is a disaster for Sean, and Gadget is up into P7. Goodness me. It's all kicking off in the final 15 minutes. We said it was going to happen, but crikey. And that means that Senna now really has become a bit of a cork in the bottle. Bottle Job's getting out of the way. He's had to get out of the way to turn 2. Bottle Job here thinking to himself, oh, goodness me, I don't want to be any part of this. I see what's happening in my rearview mirror. I just want to be out of the way. But then Senna's coming through, Bottle Job. You've got to watch out, because Senna's going to try and get the overtake on you. And looking back here in the battle for P9, it looks as though Bottle Job's got to get out of the way to the lower bank into the corner. And Senna's going to essentially use Sean in order to try and get the move done. And we're just going to hold on to this view, folks. We're going to ride with Senna here as they're coming down. Now, will Senna be able to get past Sean because Sean's in the way? This must be frustrating for the Bugatti driver, because he's got to think to himself right now, I need you to get away. And there was contact between the drivers here. And I think Sean went into the back of Bottle Job, and Bottle Job, as a result, may have some damage to the rear of the car there. And Sean is flashing his lights. This is frustrating for the drivers here. And looking at Sean, there's still that ongoing damage. So perhaps there wasn't a collision. Perhaps Sean just had to take evasive action because he was coming up so close behind Bottle Job. But what it means now, we've got a battle for P9 that's ongoing, right in the mix of taking a driver who's in P8 out of the battle for P5, and it's all kicking off non-stop. And Gadget right now is on the charge for P5. And meanwhile, hold on a second, there's the battle going on for P3 between Jaggernaut and Plux the Duck. Remember, we talked about this earlier, the battle for P3, and the fact they keep trading. It's still ongoing. They're still running as close as possible to one another here, and this is so close right now, and with only 10 minutes to go, you've got to be thinking at some point that one of these two drivers is thinking to the other. Oh, goodness me, careful, G-Rabbit, almost losing it there onto turn 1. But one of these two drivers right now in the battle for P3 is probably thinking, right, I've got to time it right, and now I've got to try and break away from the other one. We're doing well so far to keep away from the battle, expanding to include Jack in P5, what of him being 3.8 seconds down the field. But soon, one of these two drivers is going to give up with the whole mentality of let's work together to fight ourselves away. And you can see it's almost kicking off there with Juggernaut. And getting down the inside of what was Plucks the Duck into turn 1, and we can see that Sean's had to come into the pits to get the damage repaired, and that is disastrous for Sean there with that front bumper damage as he goes for the tyre change. And really now that means that Sean is going to have to rely on just securing what is P8, as we can see that further down the field we do have Muller CJ getting out the way of our race leader, G-Rabbit. Now, going up the field at this point, we've seen the gap between Jack, Flapjack and Gadget. All of it's expanded to 1.5 seconds looking forward from Flapjack and 2 seconds behind looking towards Gadget. But the real battle going on right now, as we're finally given the opportunity to take a breather, I hope, we've got Flapjack, sorry, not Flapjack, we've got Plucks the Duck and Juggernaut still fighting tooth and nail for P3. Now, taking a look back at this point, we've also got Bottle Job fighting with Senna for P9, and Bottle Job is on heavily worn tyres, and Bottle Job is struggling by looks of things to keep the pace in that car and having to defend like crazy against the Bugatti driver here. And remember, Bottle Job was the driver all the way down in last after lap 1 after a disastrous opening lap, but he's doing so much to hold on the tier 2 promoter. You've got to give the man credit. And he's still holding a defensive line into turn 4, planting it well, but he does have to keep in mind that Bugatti is going to have great legs on the straight, running in the slipstream of the Hyundai, and he may be able to get the move on the charge down to turn 1, but in return, Bottle Job just needs to think about it, and he's already taken a lower line going on to the start-finish straight, essentially saying to Ayrton, okay, if you want it on the inside, you're going to have to plant that car in such a manner as to essentially hook it around the outside. And he does look to the outside initially and go for the cutback, and it looks like Bottle Job's not been able to stem the momentum, and so has been able to get past initially. Now, will Bottle Job go for the comeback into turn 4? Will he get it on the brakes, knowing that Bugatti is going to be a bit of a heavier car by comparison? But you can see how Senna is really trying to hold a line, holding the inside of turn 3, but Bottle Job's coming back at him into turn 4 on the brakes, but not quite able to get enough alongside to dissuade Senna from cutting across the front of him under braking. And that means, and safely I should say, cutting across the front of him under braking into the corner. You're legally allowed to do that, and that means that the battle for P9 seems to have concluded with Senna finally breaking away and Bottle Job having to resolve for 10th place with an 8.8 seconds gap to Muller CJ in P11. Muller having a bit of a quiet race here, 14.5 seconds ahead of Berkey Baby in P12, the last of our runners so far. Now, meanwhile, up front, as they're on lap 78, we have G-Rabbit leading 6.8 seconds ahead of CS Smith 93, who in return is a further 12.5 seconds ahead of Plucks the Duck in P3, who is fighting tooth and nail as they come on to start lap 78, with Juggernaut from France in P4, the two drivers going at it and trying to keep Zefix's Jack at bay. But of course, Jack has closed that gap down by 1.5 seconds over the last couple of laps. The Hyundai driver smelling a P3 at this point, having got P2 last time out and getting a bit on the grass there in turn 1 for the 78th time of asking. Then we've got Flapjack 247, who's had a back and forth battle with Jack for P5. I think these two have calmed it down now and settled down into an order. I think there's going to be a lot of shouting at the stewards after this race because of what happened earlier on, but we'll leave that to one of the stewards, ladies and gentlemen. And then meanwhile, Gadget 334 holding on to P7 at the moment, 2.5 seconds off of Flapjack, who's in P6, and then there's a 12.5 seconds gap to Mr. Sean in P8, who is 34.5 seconds ahead of Ayrton Senna in P9, who has cleared the Bottle Job, who's in P10. And then we've got Muller CJ and Berkey Baby, who we said about before. Muller CJ being 6.5 seconds off the back of Sir Bottle Job and closing quite rapidly at the moment, with Bottle Job's tyres being quite heavily worn, and Bottle Job will have to make the decision whether to pit and drop to P11 and then try and get back into P10 on the final lap or so, or to stay out on the worn tyres and try and see that gap gradually fall down. And then last but not least, of course, is Berkey Baby, 16 seconds behind Muller CJ at this point in time on lap 77 and coming on to lap 78. It's absolutely crazy, therefore, so far. We have seen so much happen over the course of this race, but it's not over yet, ladies and gentlemen. And the big question right now, as we can see that Juggernaut has fallen a bit off the back of Plucks Duck, and really now is actually ending up in a fight with Jack. So this is dangerous here, because now the Hyundai of Zefix Jack in P5 is sniffing the slipstream, or almost in the region of the slipstream of Juggernaut's Dodge Tomahawk in P4. So we could be looking at a three-way fight for P3 again, or alternatively a four-way fight if these guys fight and Flapjack 247 is allowed to close that gap, which is currently at 2.6 seconds. 2.6 seconds. Goodness me and pardon me. This is just too much to handle, in all honesty, ladies and gentlemen. The fact that right now Plux is probably thinking to himself, right, just got to hold it together, keep Juggernaut at arm's reach. But remember that hybrid's not there, so we've got to do everything to get the perfect lap. So that way, when we're on the straights, he's not going to be able to close up. Meanwhile, Juggernaut's probably thinking to himself right now as he's being chased by the Hyundai of Jack, I can't let the Hyundai behind me get any closer because otherwise it's going to become a problem. I lose my opportunity to fight for P3. So he's just absolutely hammering it right now. And Jack, meanwhile, in P5 is probably thinking, I don't want to be anywhere near Jack behind me. I flap Jack. I just want to get close to Juggernaut. And you can see Juggernaut is closing up again on Plux right now. Perhaps called it off for a while, 2 laps, and now he's decided to go again with only 4 laps remaining. And we're just looking down the field at this point, and I think these are the closest guys out on circuit, folks. So we're going to stay with them. In fact, we've got out instead of Bottlejob fighting again here, and Bottlejob on the heavily worn tyres. So I get the feeling Senna's made a mistake. Someone had to back out of it, and Bottlejob is close behind. So we're going to watch these guys eagerly, and then we can see that Juggernaut is up into P3, coming into turn 1 here, and he's been going wide, and it looks as though that wide line, whilst it's a fast line, it's going to be a drag race into the entry point for turn 2 now, with Plux the Duck on the inside, and Plux knows where to plant that car, and Juggernaut's had to take a very wide line there, and he's had to pull back as a result. Now, will Juggernaut try to come back at him on the start finish straight? Well, we'll find out. So Senna's gone wide, and he's gone to slide across the glass, and Bottlejob has had to essentially back out of it to avoid a collision there, but it looks as though, and Senna's picked up a half-second penalty that will be applied. That will be multiplied to a second penalty if he doesn't clear it by the end of the race, and that means the Bottlejob is now up into P9 for the time being. But meanwhile, we've got to look back up towards the front there. It's too late to essentially take a look back, as Jack has had to come into the pits from P5 to take on some fuel, so he didn't have enough fuel to make it to the end. That's a disaster for Zephyx's Jack, and that takes him out of the run here to get a potential podium, I reckon. But in terms of looking at these guys, really, this is what it's all about right now in terms of the fight on the track, and Juggernaut must be biding his time. He's only got 3 minutes to go, and he's probably thinking to himself, right, do it when there's only 3 laps remaining, because that's when you can really put the pressure on. And you can see in that tyre life of the 2 cars right now, as noticeably, it looks as though one driver's got it horrifically wrong here, and that was Juggernaut. Got it very wrong going into the wall on the exit of turn 4, and that's cost him almost a second going down to the start finish straight here, and he will close that up because he'll add that straight line speed advantage. You can see he's already closing it up as they come down towards turn 1, but that's disastrous for Juggernaut, and that means he's got to work even more now to get into that fight for P3. Now, meanwhile, up front, we can see that G-Rabbit has had to clear some of the back markers here, and he's going to use the double toe of what is Mr. Sean here, who's catched up to Sir Bottlejob, who has cleared, as we said earlier, has effectively cleared out to set up for the time being. But G-Rabbit is the one right now who really needs these guys to get out of his way, because he is being closed down by CS Smith, and that's the problem right now for G-Rabbit. With only 2 minutes to go, there's a 3.7 second gap. But if any of these drivers are not aware of the fact they need to get away, oh goodness me, no, Sir Bottlejob has picked up engine damage whilst trying to get out the way of G-Rabbit, and that is a disaster for the British driver. That means all the hard work he's put in to get into that P9 has had to be scrapped. He's got to pit immediately because that engine is severely damaged. That is a disaster, and that could put him down to P11 permanently, with Berkey Baby in the pits right now and having to, I think, repair some damage to the car as well, or take on some new tyres. But the good news is for Bottlejob, he will not have to worry about Berkey Baby. Smith is now coming into the pits. Now there's no damage to the car, so Smith is out of fuel almost, and that means that Plux the Duck here could be on for a surprise run, depending on how well Smith is able to get out of the pits and get the car reignited and not get caught up in the fighting. And in fact, it looks as though Smith has had tons of time to play with, but that means all G-Rabbit's got to do right now is cool it down, manage that gap, manage that fuel, and he'll be our race winner within a minute to go. Meanwhile, further down, we can see that Plux the Duck is again feeling the pressure from Juggernaut. Now, before they close up anymore, is there any more fighting further down the field? I don't think so, ladies and gentlemen. So the big fight in the final couple of laps now, and really the final 2 laps, will be between P3 and P4, with Juggernaut on an absolute charge here and doing everything, including throwing the kitchen sink at the rear of Plux the Duck's Audi to try and get that P3 back right at the end here. But it's going to be a huge order with a second between the 2 drivers here, and I get the feeling if Plux gets it right with only 1 more lap to go for Plux, he's going to be able to hold on here, because this will be their final lap. I'm going to have to wait and see who's going to come across the line to essentially complete their first lap shortly, because it's a very short lap around here. But we'll wait and find out. We're just going to see. And it looks as though Plux has done enough to pull away, with Juggernaut's charge being quelled. 1.3 seconds the gap now. We'll keep our eyes on it though. But I don't think there's going to be any closure between the 2 at this point. And we can see that Flapjack is essentially ahead of Jack because of the pit stop that Jack had to make, but the gap is very small at the moment, and it could switch if there's even a minor mistake. But we'll find out shortly as they're coming to the end of their lap then. So to complete and come home in P3, it will be Plux the Duck. And then Jaggernaut in P4, congratulations to both of them. Flapjack 247 in P5, and there's going to be Jack in P6. Then in P7 it will be Gadget 334, and it's going to be, I think, one of our back markers. So that'll be Sir Bottlejob in P11. And then we have got Gadget who's come across in P7, Mr. Sean in P8, then Ayrton Senna in P9, Muller CJ in P10, just about holding on. Our race winner, G Rabbit, the Finn 1, has brought it home, and CS Smith coming home in P2. And I think that's all of our race runners done. And congratulations to our race winner, G Rabbit from Finland. What an absolute cracker of a race. We had everything there. We had drama, we had excitement, we had classic overtakes, we had slipstream battles, we had tactical battles, we had strategy battles, we had grievances. We're going to probably have the stewards being shouted at in the years for days to come by the drivers saying this guy did this, this guy did that. But what an absolute cracking race, and what a show race for the Acelith Design Endurance Championship in Season 6. We thought race 1 was an absolutely phenomenal race. Well, race 2, despite being on a track which was all about who was the fastest car around the circuit on a straight line, it was as much that as a tactical one, and it was a crazy race. Goodness me.
And with that, that's all we've got time for today. If you have enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and or subscribe to both my channel and also the official Drivers Room YouTube channel, as may be found in the description of this video. But until next time, I've been your host TX141, or Britain a Spit, and remember to stay safe, stay well, stay smiling, but most importantly, stay on track.